All right, we had a very big day today. We went back into the courtroom. I guess we should give a few minutes for people to get in here. So we know Leventhal motioned for a mistrial at the end of the day yesterday. They went back in. The government responds to Leventhal's motion. The government clearly intends to put the mindset of the defendants on trial here for the 12th. And that's what they're doing, going back to all of these Facebook posts and also bringing in 3% of Idaho, Sugar Pine Mine, and White Hope Mine. But what they're talking about here is the McVeigh post. And so she is saying that she's always, they're going to the mindset. And there's not much difference from what McVeigh did and what these guys did by being on a bridge with guns stopping federal agents. She is basically saying that what these guys did is as bad as what McVeigh did. Even though McVeigh, there was over 100 people killed or a lot of people killed and no violence on the 12th at the wash. Now, Leventhal gets up and argues, well, it's not the fact that you read the post. McVeigh was in the post, but you misrepresented it, and you went and you elicited more testimony from Sarah Draper about what McVeigh was, what he did. And Nadia Ahmed gets up and says, explaining the admitted exhibit is allowed in court. Basically, they go back and forth. Marchese says that what Mr. Parker said 18 months after the fact didn't have anything to do with 18 months before. And if you look at the indictment, it has nothing to do with 3% of Idaho, Sugar Pine Mine, or White Hope Mine. The judge. The government has to pick and choose what the government decides to prosecute or not. So they're saying that Sugar Pine Mine and White Hope Mine is part of the conspiracy, but the government has picked and chose not to actually prosecute for that. And then they said something about a 403 balancing test. I'm not sure what that is. And the judge says, no, this is not a 404B. I'm not even sure what that is either. We're going to have to do some research on that. I think Leventhal gets back up. If the government wants to talk mindset, but yet the defense isn't allowed to talk mindset. The defense has lots of things to bring in that go to mindset. And here the government is saying that they're reading the Facebook post and they're going to try to prove mindset even though defense can't talk about it at all. And the government prevents that. Then we go back into cross-examination of Sarah Draper. Marchese says the video link, they bring up the Facebook posts. They bring up the Facebook post. Does anyone know anybody in the Nevada militia that Eric posted? The fact that it had no responses. This is what they're trying to do here. If you share a news article, if you post something, it doesn't even matter if anyone responds to it. It's going to be used against you to prove a conspiracy. Even, Leventhal gets up and he says, look at the posts that are being shared from Drexler. One's from MSNBC. One's from Reuters. These are mainstream media. And he is just sharing a post from mainstream media, and they read the summary of that post, which is the first couple lines of that post, and they're using what that media wrote as evidence against these guys. They're using what Reuters wrote against these guys in court. Then Leventhal gets into Scott Drexler's Facebook page. He said, you personally got on Mr. Drexler's Facebook page and took some screenshots of public posts because their Facebook warrant only went from July back to March of 2014. And you testified that other agents took these screenshots and then would get them to you. And then she kept saying employees, not agents. So employees, not agents, through the entire line of questioning. So that really brings something up. Is a paid informant considered an employee? I'm guessing if the government's footing the bill and they are being paid for information, it would make sense. Then he was asked, were you aware if anyone was arrested in Oregon? The judge immediately calls a sidebar. They all go back. We've had lots of sidebars. The sidebars today were extremely long. We're all sitting there, and I think the jury's seeing this. They're seeing something's going on. He has to come back. That's sustained, and he asks another question. Were you aware if Mr. Drexler pointed a gun at anyone? Were you aware if Mr. Drexler demanded anything from anyone in Oregon? Do you know even how long he was in Oregon? Have you ever had any dealings with the 3% of Idaho? That was objected to. They don't want to get anything out in this line of questioning. After 2012, have you ever had any dealings with anyone in the 3% of Idaho? Another objection and a sidebar. Did you? He was able to come back and ask this question. Did you in your law enforcement capacity have any dealings with the Idaho 3%? That was also objected to, and he still can't get this information out. She was the lead on the investigation into Drexler, Parker, and Stewart. How many employees? They had 5 or 6 different employees working on this. Then they were talking about how does Eric Parker's post end up on Scott Drexler's page with a tag? She tries to say that you have to approve every tag. I know that you can put that setting on your Facebook, but she's trying to make it seem like, you don't have to put that setting on your Facebook. And he brings up the fact that only Steven Stewart and Eric Parker even messaged to that. So what we have here is we have a Facebook post that's being brought against Eric Parker. We have the same Facebook post that's being brought then again against Steven Stewart and Scott Drexler. This is where all the accumulative evidence. They're bringing the same thing in 2 or 3 days later, which is the exact same thing we've already seen. She did say that another employee had pulled that off of the internet. And that employee in the screenshot shows that he has 4 mutual friends with Scott Drexler. So whatever government employee or informant took that screenshot of his Facebook had 4 mutual friends. I'm guessing that Eric Parker's one of those mutual friends. Steven Stewart's one of those mutual friends. That leaves 2 other people. Then he brought up a question asking if your employees are able to communicate with them online. She keeps saying no, that's not possible. It's for watching only. They bring up a post where a gentleman says, be careful on the bridge, they can be choke points. And he responds to it in a certain way, and Leventhal says, see, here you can have your friends trying to coerce you into saying something. The government's redirect, it asked her if to her knowledge, if she knew of any of these government employees working undercover, coerced any information from the defendants. And that was not to her knowledge. Then we go to the jury questions. Okay, so we had some really good jury questions today. One was asking about their sources, if they're taking anything other than Facebook. I think they're saying, all of your evidence here is Facebook, so you don't have anything else. Another question was if your team was looking at Eric, Stephen, Scott before the 12th. No, they weren't. They asked what day they started their investigation on these guys, and she could not answer that. Then they were asked about the posts, if they were visible to friends only, or anyone who looked at the page, talking about the screenshots. They're picking up on what Leventhal is saying. Another question. Draper testified that on Facebook was pulled by publicly viewable content. Would becoming friends with that person make a post publicly viewable content? She then has to go back and say, she has to change her previous testimony that a friend of a person would not make the post publicly viewable, and that some of the evidence that was entered today was not publicly viewable, and there was no search warrant. There was an informant that was taking, or an informant, a government paid employee that was friends with these gentlemen on their Facebook, taking screenshots and giving them to the government. Of course, these screenshots there's nothing in these screenshots that is even worth anything. Another jury question: would the pic attached to the Facebook post be visible in the Facebook warrant return? Because here we have a bunch of gray screens. They can't even see the post, and all they're seeing is the text that these guys are writing. In order for a friend to be on Facebook, does that action have to be approved by both parties? This is a huge question, and we'll get into it in the redirect. Another question is, if you were given training to look at Facebook returns or deal with Facebook returns, she says only working by experience. Next one talked about subpoenas and search warrants and the dates on all of that, a period and time frame. So they're really getting into this. They're really understanding that something's being set up here. Then, by some of her questions, do you have a method of determining who posted what post, such as a friend, wife, or husband? So this is coming from the jury saying even a Facebook post could be posted by someone else. You know, there's many couples that have a joint Facebook account. I believe it has been brought up that maybe Cheyenne was posting for Ricky Wall on the day of. So she could say no, that you could give out your username and password and anyone could post for you. Another one was on an exhibit, if Mr. Parker wrote the comment at the bottom of the post. And no, that was a shared post once again, and that comment wasn't written by him. So here we have people who are intelligent and they're picking up on these things. Another question, 115, was a question about the scope and would not be addressed in the legal instruction. Now this jury question had to do with the fact if these guys are being charged with crimes with Sugar Pine Mine, White Hope Mine. And when the government and everyone was talking about this, before the jury was brought in, because they always have a sidebar after the jury questions and they discuss what they're going to ask and what they're not going to ask and how they're going to change things. I believe this jury question was asking why they're bringing this irrelevant information in. So when they're arguing this in court, they had let the jury go to lunch and everyone else is sitting there. When they're arguing this in court, the argument is that Sugar Pine Mine and White Hope Mine are furtherance of the conspiracy. And Leventhal and Marchese are arguing that nowhere in the indictment does it say anything about Sugar Pine or White Hope Mine. That the indictment has to deal with cattle, Clive and Bundy, and extorting federal officers from executing a court order in Nevada. It has nothing to do with Sugar Pine Mine or White Hope Mine. The judge herself is talking here. She says, it is included. Leventhal at one point says, show me where the testimony in the grand jury testimony has anything to do with this. Show me where it has anything to do with many of the other people. Well, she says, some of the other people like Skylar Barbeau and Blaine Cooper also went to some of the mines. Both of those names were brought up a lot of times in court today. Then that same person asked a different part of question, what criteria do you use for a post to be considered relevant enough to be viewed by you versus from one of your paid employees? And she took a long time answering this. She did really bad in cross-examination. She did really bad in the jury questions. She got up there like, I don't know anything about Facebook, very confused. It didn't go well. Another jury question. Did your agents deliberately engage in conversation to get the defendants to incriminate themselves? She says no. Another question about UTC. Before Leventhal asked, before they get to question 118, he'd like a sidebar. They go to the sidebar, and I'm not really sure because the sidebar's done out of our ears, so I'm not really sure, but I don't know if they decided to not ask a question or ask a question. The next question was about metadata and the investigation. She doesn't really know. Another question was about the guidelines for making redactions on the post. This one, the judge is going to answer. Any redactions that the parties do not agree upon, I make that decision. Once again, these jurors are saying something's not right here. Why do you have all these posts with redactions? Why are all these sidebars? What is your undercover informants doing? Leventhal then gets into his questioning about accepting a friend request. And that if your government employees are not coercing people into conversation, are they not coercing people into a Facebook friendship by making their account look like someone that person would be friends with? Especially someone like Scott Drexler, who isn't on Facebook very often, and doesn't use Facebook very much. For him to just approve some weird random person, not very likely. There's lots of objections, and I believe a sidebar around this time as well. And then he comes back. In order to ask someone to be a friend, you have to have a Facebook account. And those agents would make their own accounts. And if that person made their own account and you're not with them all the time, how do you know they're not coercing things? And that they would be created so that a person like Drexler would approve them. Then she said, yes, one of our employees did become a friend with Drexler. We know one undercover employee was a friend with Drexler. They did have an alias account that was created, but it was created way before he friend requested Drexler. It was already an existing account. Then she was asked if she was involved in making the account or how much she knew about that, and it wasn't. Another question was, you were asked if you saw a post about Eric ever saying that he was going to shoot law enforcement officers. And her answer was no, but her answer was like a roundabout, I don't recall anything like that. So Marchese gets up and says, well, if you had seen something like that, that would have been relevant enough to put in your report, to bring here in the courtroom. Because obviously, and when they asked that question when the jury wasn't around, I believe the snickering remark from the prosecution, you mean other than by any means? Because if you say by any means, even though in the last trial, we know when he said by any means, he said he was going to go down there and camp out until they release them. Then they call back up Special Agent Joel Willis. This is the FBI agent that just yesterday in the courtroom was doing this in front of the jury. Or fist bumping out like there, and the other lady's doing this in front of the jury. He is able to sit behind the prosecution on the other side of the bar. We are on the opposite side of the bar through the entire trial, and now he is testifying twice. He is going to bring in his timeline. His timeline is all the evidence that we've already seen, re-screenshotted, and had little yellow boxes with people's names and arrows pointing to each person. So he's identifying the people, and if you've seen some of these pictures, they're from very far away. One of them's a truck driving by, and they say Stephen Stewart and Scott Drexler are in the back of that truck, and you can barely even see. So what they're doing here is they're trying to erase the reasonable doubt by putting these little boxes with the names on it. There is 88 exhibits in this slide, and then there's a sidebar. This sidebar lasts 25 minutes, and she comes back and says it will be entered in its entirety. So once again, everything that the prosecution wants gets in. Everything the defense is arguing, no. They then go through all of the evidence that we have all already previously seen, and they put it into a slideshow with times added to it, times that he's making up, or supposed times, so that he can have this big giant timeline. In the timeline, he is bringing in Ryan Payne, Ryan Bundy, Dave Bundy, Cliven Bundy, even other individuals. And they're going through this. We only got through 26 different exhibits of the 88. This is a cumulative evidence. All of this evidence, every piece of evidence that's entered, goes back to the jury room for deliberation. And so what they're trying to do here is give them so many of the exact same pictures, an accumulation of evidence for them to go back into the jury room, and they're find him guilty because there's so many of the same picture. They must have done it. Hopefully they will get out of this. He does start his testimony with bringing in Todd Ingles' Facebook and Todd Ingles' Facebook return. Now, he's not the FBI agent that brought in Todd Engle's Facebook return last time. Apparently, the rules of evidence have gone out the window, and they're just going to bring whoever in so that person can say what they want them to say. With them bringing Todd Engle and his stuff in, they're basically trying to use the fact that Todd Engle was found guilty against these guys. And they're not even going through, they're using the posts. Let's read them off. His Facebook post. Sheriff is given 1 hour to disarm the BLM. Another one. Headed out to block the freeway and take the cows back. They're taking these Facebook posts and putting them in the timeline. So at what time Todd Engle posts something? At what time Eric Parker posts something? And this made me think. I've got a lot of questions here. This leads me to believe that they needed to find this tier guilty before they went into the Bundy trial. And it wasn't because that the gun crimes would be easier to get a guilty conviction for. And why do I think that? Well, let's see. Cliven, Brian and Ammond and Pete Santilli, I'm pretty sure they weren't armed when they went down there. I know Pete wasn't, and I'm pretty sure Cliven never even went down to the area. So, ask yourself, how can they charge all of these Tier 1 guys with 3 different 924C charges that hold a mandatory minimum of 57 years if they cannot get the gun convictions? If they have to get these gun convictions to hold the 924Cs against these other guys. I know, how do you charge someone that doesn't even have a weapon on them, like Pete Santilli, with 3 different 924C charges? How is that possible? Well, they try to say that they're doing that because he made a video and some of his videos are the reason that some of these people went, even though it was Ryan Payne's video that was calling for the militia. And so how do you charge these people that didn't have weapons on them with 3 different 924C charges that hold a 57-year mandatory minimum? This is what's going on here, people. It's so important what's going on in the courtroom. Now we have our entire Constitution. It's not just the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. Our entire Constitution, our entire American foundation is on trial in this courtroom. Militia, it is illegal to be in a militia in multiple states. Does anyone know if that is true? What they are doing here is so unlawful and so inappropriate, and apparently it's just going to be swept under the rug and let go on by. If we get a mistrial here because these jurors can see that something's going on, they're just going to keep throwing money at it. Your money, the taxpayers' money. They have already spent millions of dollars. I mean millions of dollars. So much that they will no longer say how much money has gone into prosecuting these people. Millions of your taxpayer dollars when they say that there's no money for Social Security and taking care of people and cutting education. They are spending millions of your taxpayer dollars to charge everyday American citizens that believe in the justice and the rule of law in these courtrooms. And why are they doing that? Because they are trying to take over the land and make sure that these people get charged, because they can't have Americans standing up to the federal government. If they do that, we might as well go back to 1776. So, what are we going to do about it, people? Who out there is in a militia that's upset with the fact that the prosecution is saying that in the courtroom? Let's get some videos. If you and your militia is upset, take some flags out. Go do a rally and do a video and post it with her and tag her in it. And tag Trump and tell him we don't appreciate this judge and this prosecution saying that the militia is illegal in many states. In fact, if militia is illegal in many states, doesn't that mean that the standing armies are illegal? The National Guard, is the National Guard not a militia? What are we going to do here? When are we going to call upon our representatives to actually do something or impeach them and get them out of office? When is enough going to be enough?